Looks like I'm beginning. Good evening, everyone. I'm Nat Hunter, and I'm one of the directors of design here at the RSA. And it is my great pleasure to welcome you all here for this evening's special event, the Bicentenary Medal presentation. The Bicentenary Medal was instituted in 1954 to commemorate the founding of the RSA 200 years earlier, and has been awarded annually to a variety of individuals for their outstanding contributions to the advancement of design in industry and society. Today, this contribution is interpreted as the most effective use of design to increase the resourcefulness of people and communities. Previous winners have included Cameron Sinclair and Kate Storr, founders of Architecture for Humanity, educationalist and writer Sir Christopher Frayling, and Helen Hamlin, advocate of better environments and better designed products for older people. Before we begin, can I just ask you to make sure that your mobile phones are switched to silent? We're live streaming tonight's event, so welcome to our online viewers. And a reminder that the hashtag is RSA Quirk, Q-U-I-R-K, if you want to get involved in the discussion on Twitter. So it's my great pleasure to give you an introduction to our distinguished speaker for this evening, Barry Quirk. Barry has been Chief Executive of the London Borough of Lewisham since 1994 and has worked in local government for over 30 years. Between 2006 and 2008, he was the President and Chairman of SOLIS, the National Association for the Local Government of Chief Executives. Barry has been involved in policy development and public management at regional and national levels for over a decade. He has served as non-executive director on the board of HM Revenue and Customs. He was an independent member of 2 capability reviews of HM Treasury, and he was appointed by government to be the National Efficiency Champion for local government. In 2007, he produced a landmark report for government on the potential transfer of public assets to community groups. Barry has a CBE for services to local government and writes regularly on public policy and management. He's a Senior Fellow of Social Policy and Politics at Goldsmiths University, an Associate with the Independent Institute for Government, and a member of Collaborate, which promotes private, public and social sector collaboration at South Bank University. I just want to clarify what kind of design we're talking about here tonight. The word design is often misunderstood these days, as it's developed significantly, especially in the last decade. It's even debated within the design industry. And at the RSA, in the design department, we're interested in the ways that design can directly benefit society. Our Student Design Awards, in their 89th year this year, might help me illustrate this point. We reward students for applying their design skills to real-world problems. Sometimes the winning solution is not a poster or a product, but it could be a completely new way of doing things. If the designer has identified a problem area and generated ideas for improvement, then designed a product or service that is useful, usable, efficient, effective, and desirable, then they're in the running for a Student Design Award. Recent winners have addressed such issues as making the guide dog harness more effective using 3D printing technology, preventing rural pubs from shutting down by providing landlords with the tools to engage with different community groups, and encouraging charitable giving through the Oyster card. Many of our winners are now redesigning public services, and it's this kind of design we're here to talk about tonight. My first encounter with Barry was last year. I was part of a steering group for the Design Commission, a group composed of parliamentarians and leading representatives from business, industry, and the public sector. The purpose of this inquiry was to determine whether or not design was an effective tool to improve public services, both from a customer experience perspective and, of course, from a cost-saving angle. Barry was the co-chair, along with Baroness Kingsmill, and I soon realised that he was a powerful advocate for the principles of great design. And this was something that came from his own experience and practice. In fact, Barry was one of the first government local council chief executives to work with the Design Council, working with them on their steering group on how design could help public services in 2008. He then put Lewisham forward to go through the Design Council programme, Public Services by Design, and as I found out when we actually went to interview his team at Lewisham Council, Barry was quick to identify the potential of design tools, which could then be applied in a number of very practical ways to improve public services. Together with Baroness Kingsmill, Barry co-authored the Design Commission report, Restarting Britain 2, which explored how design could contribute to renewing public services. One of the report's key tasks was not only to convince government and public sector organisations of the benefits of design, but also to explain to them what design is in this context. In my view, it did this admirably, going beyond the familiar rhetoric of design's transformative powers and providing a roadmap of recommendations about how to build design into public services, with examples of very well-designed public services from UK and across Europe. It shows, and I paraphrase an article by Barry in The Guardian here, that design is not a panacea for public service reform, but that public sector leaders need to acquire design skills if they are to stand a reasonable chance of reshaping and refashioning the services for which they are responsible. Design offers a fresh approach to rethinking policy, redrawing professional practice, and reshaping service delivery. It's also a very well-designed document in the traditional sense. It's very clear and easy to digest, and you can download it on the Policy Connect website. So when I was asked to nominate candidates for the Bicentenary Medal, and I started thinking of people I knew who used design to increase the resourcefulness of people and communities, Barry immediately sprang to mind. So I am, of course, delighted with the final decision of the panel. And it gives me great pleasure to announce Barry as the recipient of this year's Bicentenary Medal. We're very much looking forward to hearing from him very soon, and afterwards he'll be joined on stage by Matt Hunter, Chief Design Officer for the Design Council. Matt will direct the discussion with Barry, and they are looking forward to your questions. Matt heads up the Design Council's Design Challenges programme, that in my view is the big brother of our RSA Student Design Awards, setting challenges for practicing designers and businesses and demonstrating how design can drive innovation through tackling the big issues of our time. Whether stopping the spread of superbugs, reducing crime, or promoting health and wellness for an ageing population, the programme shows how design can help build a stronger economy and improve everyday life. It now gives me great pleasure to present you, Barry Quirk, with the Bicentenary Medal for applying design to great effect in public services. And I'm also pleased to award you the Honorary Life Fellowship of the RSA. So there's the medal. Thank you.
And as you'd expect, it's well designed. Thank you very much indeed. I admit to being rather embarrassed to receive this award and actually rather fraudulent. Obviously, it's been pointed out that I co-chaired a Design Commission review. I'm actually personally indebted to the public entrepreneurship of Lord Michael Bechard, who's at the front here, who sponsored and initiated the commission, and also to Baroness Kingsmill. I'm particularly indebted to Jocelyn Bailey for the work that she did in making sure that I didn't make a fool of myself, and that we also had a stellar array of people giving advice to us as to what it is that we should be doing. I've learnt from many enthusiastic service managers in my time about what they want to do, not to maintain public services, but to improve the life experiences and the life chances of people. And learning from service managers is a very powerful thing. In all of this, the only role I've played really is an interlocutor, someone that basically translates between management and designers. And it's in that simple role as an interlocutor, I want to make some remarks now about design and public management and public services. So let me just start. What I'm simply going to say is that design, like management, is contingent. By that I mean it's about creating, the art of becoming, the creating of something, bringing something into being. design is also a crucial approach to help management and politicians and public servants reshape public services, particularly during the austerity programme that we're all being subject to. And I want to finish with 3 challenges for design and for public policy. I'm going to refer to the Design Council's challenges and say how good they are, and I'm going to add 3 more challenges. All of my professional experience is actually working in a place or in places and working with local communities. And really that makes me think of the physical fabric of a place and the cultural dynamics of a place. And every place is different. Whether it's Devon or Deptford or Derby or Daventry, wherever it is, places are different. They have their own history, their own uniqueness. And design brings both an opportunity for uniformity in experience, but also uniqueness of experience. So we think of urban design, of service design, of policy design, design of organisations, design of governance. Design influences so much in relation to local government, but particularly also the public sector. But what I'm going to focus on really is service design, although I could have easily talked about urban design and the contribution that design makes to the very world that we live in, the streets that we walk in, the physical fabric of urban areas. There's also the issue about how we solve public problems. And I firmly believe that most public problems are knotty, they're difficult, and they're best solved by the public themselves. If not, they're best solved by multidisciplinary teams. They're rarely best solved by a functional group of people that are trained in one particular thing and they're working to try to solve a public problem. Secondly, public problems, the solutions to them start with the user, not the provider. All solutions start with the user, not the provider. And I think what that means is that public agencies, public institutions need to be strongly and intensely actively listening to their public rather than spending their time dealing only with the issues of their organisation. In other words, be watchful of the producerism, where the provider of the service comes first. The most elegant form of producerism are those people that do reputation analysis or stakeholder analysis. Because what they're doing is they want to know what other people think of them. If you've got very elaborate stakeholder and reputation analysis, you're probably doing the right thing. But if it's the only thing you're doing, you're institutionally egoist. So you need to think through, are you, in working in a public agency, a tribune of the people or actually a tribune of the provider? And I think what a management perspective does and what a design perspective does is it starts with the user, not the provider. The other thing which I think is so crucial is that what's needed most is a form of creative experimentation. It's an ethic of creative experimentation, which is basically imagination plus trial and error. It's very simple. There's nothing complicated. Trial and error has been with us for millennia. It's just imagination matched with trial and error. And those things, I think, help us solve public problems. The trouble is, there's layer upon layer of management fashions. Here are 35. Here's the first 20 or so. The first one started in 1939, cost-benefit analysis. I won't talk you through all of them. Here's the remaining 10. So the most recent ones really are disruptive innovation, ideas management, behaviour change, big data analytics and design thinking. Actually, the one that's dominated public debate over the last 6 months has been the cost-benefit analysis of HS2, which actually takes us back to 1939 cost-benefit analysis. Now, the point about these trends is not that one replaces the other, but that all of them are pertinent and relevant. And design thinking and design approaches add to previous approaches. They don't negate them, it adds to them. The next thing, of course, is that management itself, in my view, involves design. Management is a science, it's analysis, it's an art, it involves vision, and it's a craft, it's about experience. The trouble is, if the person who's leading an organisation only applies science, then they're a desiccated calculator, spend their entire time analysing. If they're an artist, they spend their whole time as a narcissist. If they're focused all the time on the world of experience and craft, they end up being tedious bores. I leave it to you to decide who it is you work for. But actually, the truth is, if they're a mixture of science and art, then they're rather disconnected from the world of work and experience. If they're a mixture of art and craft, they're really disorganised because they're just based on experience and vision. And if they're based entirely on science and craft, then they're dispirited because they don't engage people. Design, like management, involves science and art and craft, but it's blending it properly, blending it appropriately, not one dominating the other that's crucial. Now I get to the challenge of the time. The recession started 66 months ago. Yes, there are economic improvements, but UK economic output is still 2.3% below what it was in January 2008. This is a very significant recession that we're going through. Puts it another way, this time I think it is very different. Here is the Bank of England's chart from its report before last on what had happened in the previous two recessions. This was 1979, and this is household spending, which is consumption, and household income. So 21 quarters after the 1979 recession, spending was up by nearly 6%, and income was up by over 10%. So after 5 years, people had forgotten. By 1984, people almost forgotten the 1979 recession. This was the 1990 recession. After 5 years, spending had gone up by 10% and income gone up by 12%. This is the 2007 recession, after 5 years. This is private households. So 21 quarters after, people are spending less and they're earning less than they did in 2007. This is a very significant change. What that's doing is it's altering people's household formation when they move, their demands for public services. It's having a big generational impact on public services in a way that previous recessions didn't. And those that are working in the public sector are experiencing tremendous disruptions in demands for their service, whether this is demands for primary schools, demands for secondary schools, or whatever it is. The future of public services, really, many public services, particularly in London, the services are really housed in 19th century facilities. They're providing services that were designed really in the mid-20th century, while we're struggling to work out what are the 21st century needs, while we're midway through an austerity programme. And actually we've only made half of the level of budget reductions that needs to be made that are actually planned. So there's very significant challenges. And when we're looking at reducing costs, I think that we need to think through what are the options. Well, you can trim back services, just make a percentage reduction in a service. You can delayer the number of people that are working in it. There's layers of people that work in this service. You delayer. You can merge different functions and therefore merge your management overhead, or have people working used to work in 4 locations in 1 location to rationalise. You can share services or share the purchase of services with others. You can make more saving by boosting productivity, perhaps even than by sharing service. You can buy services with other people. You can have a better supply chain. Design your supply chain better to reduce your cost by 10%. You're actually saving much more money by getting people to demand your service less. So better demand management probably has a bigger payoff than smarter supply management. But what has a bigger payoff than that is radical redesign of services. In my view, the radical redesign of services, repurposing services for the next century, is the way that we need to be thinking through. Because delivering services really that are 20th century services, when actually we're doing so in the 21st century, is partly our problem. The consequences of bad design is, we all know it because we experience it, whether it's in the private sector or the public sector. Things are too complex, they're rather calculated, you've got to work it out. It's sort of low worth, it's quite cold, low trust, it's inefficient. The consequences of a good service, good design, is it's simple, it's intuitive, it's got high value, it's warm, it's high trust, it's efficient. There's not many services that have been redesigned in a fundamentally different way. I thought of one actually on the way here. Well, I think I've got one here. It's called the Oyster card. Actually changed and transformed the experience of Londoners' use of the transport. That is the sort of thinking we need to be thinking about in many, many other service areas. The pace of change in product design is enormous. How many people here once or have ever owned a Nokia phone? How many people? Okay. Now, how many people still own a Nokia phone? Now, do you have phone envy, you people, or are you retro? You've got a few phones. Ah, well, there's a man. You should. Anyway. In other words, the pace of change that we have, we experience it in our personal lives. And we need to, this is the first computer being delivered to a town hall in Norwich. I thought it was a mock-up photograph, first of all, but it's actually true. More computer power now in anything. But the pace of change is enormous. Now, when we think about design, design is really researching user needs, visualising the solutions and prototyping and improving. And actually what it's about is saying, well, if today's arrangement is okay, so today's okay, we'll live with the design we've got by default. Actually, the next step is saying, let's improve the look and feel, which is designer's styling. And then it's, let's solve some social problems, which is applying design as a discipline. Or when it's reforming public services, it's actually design being used as a strategy. And design really has possible potential contributions across that entire range, from improving look and feel, which is important, to solving social problems, to actually being used as a strategy for public service. Prototyping, I think, is really important because one of the few things I haven't been able to introduce in my years in local government is a mistake of the month competition. Simply because it writes the newspaper headlines for the following week. Lewisham's fouled up again. This is the mistake of the month. But I do think that a learning organisation is one that learns from its errors and learns from its mistakes. And I think what prototyping does is it enables local government to actually genuinely learn by failing. And I think the best ever thing is Sam Beckett's thing about learning, which is ever failed, no matter, try again, fail better. The idea that we will find some absolutely brilliant way of doing this, that we're going to change to that and never change again, is ridiculous. So we have to design in a way that's always iterative. And I think that prototyping, simply as a technique for design, is useful in the public sector because it lowers the political risk of failure. It lowers the politics and the heat about failure. The Design Council's challenges are really about searching for practical solutions to serious social problems, and here is 4 that they've got challenges on at the moment. You can read on their website. Brilliant stuff about health and well-being for under 5s, how to get young people's talents and careers can be amplified, how people with dementia their lives can be improved in simple ways through design, and how violence and aggression in A&E can be reduced through design. I think these are marvellous problem-solving approaches. But I think, and the reason why I've got people I've left, I thought if you might get nothing out of this, at least you've got a pencil. You know, if you listen to this bloke, you've taken a pencil home. It's almost like crackerjack. for those of you that can remember that. The point about this, there is a point of the pencil. Well, obviously there is a point of the pencil, but there's also another point, and that is it demonstrates the whole idea of utility. Functional utility is how does it work or does it work? Emotional utility is how does it make me feel? Social utility is how does it make me look? Now, if I've got a Mont Blanc pencil, this is socially useful because it makes me look rather crass and vulgar. So I've got a ridiculously expensive pencil. But actually, if I have a pencil that's written on it, something that's quite odd, really, it might make me feel different about the pencil. Now, mostly you get pencils and it just hasn't written on them something which is corporate, Lewisham Council or something, or a particular. This basically says draw inspiration. Perhaps you should draw it, and design happiness. How can you do that? What does it make you feel? What does it make you reflect? Now, how many public services do we think about? How does it make people feel when they experience it? I think we're just stuck in functional utility. How does it work? We never think, how does it make people feel? And I think that's the crucial step for public services and design. So I've got 3 challenges of my own, which I'm going to finish with. One is, how can we design kindness into the public realm? And by the public realm, I mean the realm in which people operate, the way in which they walk about, the way in which they cycle, the way in which they drive. Is there a way we can design kindness into it, or do we just put, bollards up, make it safe? Or are we actually about trying to make people feel differently when they're doing things? This is and then, of course, there's how do we design contribution into public services? People think they contribute through their taxes, and that then makes them entitled to services. Well, I think that sense of entitlement is changing. We need to think about the contribution that people are making to their community that they're living in. How do we design a sense of contribution into our services? And finally, a challenge, how do we design participation into democracy? We're spending a lot of public resources being spent designing security and integrity into voting. We're having the introduction of independent electoral registration shortly, so that you can't vote based on just listing yourself as a household. You have to register as individuals, and that's about making sure that privacy, integrity and security are there. Well, how do we design participation into it? Have you ever voted? When you go and vote, does it feel welcoming? It's the most off-putting experience you've probably ever. It tells you about 15 ways in which you'd break the law before you've even crossed the threshold. So how do we design participation? And I think we need to think much more about these sorts of emotional aspects of experience that people have, citizens and service users have about public services, rather than just focus all the time on functional utility. And I'll say finally that for me success rests on the mastery of creative disciplines, but applying them to the mystery of creative imagination. For me, that is the crucial thing. Organisations that are successful marry a sense of discipline and a sense of imagination. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Barry, and congratulations on the medal. I can't honestly believe you feel fraudulent after such an amazingly articulate and insightful presentation about design, and to top the actual direct impact that you've made.
Well, I'm a translator, I'm not a designer, that's why I feel fraudulent. But I literally do feel that my role is to translate lots of different things into the public sector, whether it's how we change and improve and how we continue to make services relevant.
That's great, thank you. So I think this is a great opportunity. I'll sort of kick off the conversation But I think that one thing I've often heard people say, I think almost directly, is we really must clone Barry Quirk. So I think this is a great opportunity. I'm not going to stick needles into you, but hopefully with my exceptionally capable lab assistants here, we should be asking you such penetrating questions that we'll get into the essence of Barry, and we'll bring it out and webcast it, and we shall all become a bit more like you. So that's the goal anyway. So I'll kick things off, and then I will bring this fantastic mixture of parliamentarians and policymakers and the public and everyone else in the audience. Perhaps it's a good idea to go back a little bit to the beginnings of you thinking that design was an interesting thing to learn more about and to absorb into your practice. Nat mentioned a little bit about an event in 2008 that with the Design Council. Was that where it was? Was it earlier? Was it later? Could you tell us a bit more about what that dawning was for you, if it was indeed a dawning?
Yes, I think it was about 2008 and maybe before then, but it was essentially about thinking about services from the user perspective. And the fact that it's very, very difficult when you're managing and providing services to detach yourself from the provision, from that producerist approach, and say, how does the user experience it? And yes, you experience it when you experience other services, when you go to hospital or where you receive a public service elsewhere. When you receive any service, you experience it as a user. And it's trying to inject that sense of user experience. And I thought design started from that, which is what the people with the management responsibility in organisations are supposed to do.
And so as I understand it, you're pretty quick, therefore, to say, this seems interesting, let's try it out.
Yes.
Do you think that's pretty unusual in terms of the way in which you operate? Do you see other people around you taking a similar approach to, let's give it a go?
Yes, I think so. I think there are others. I'm not uniquely quick. Other people are just as quick and thinking about this. And I think particularly when the pace of change in local government and the public sector has really, since the recession, the pace of change has been so swift. In terms of businesses, communities have changed tremendously. I think the public sector needs to change as quickly. And I think since then, really, the pace has quickened up.
But even back then, when you're saying, okay, this is interesting, let's try it out. I mean, how on earth do you get away with, perhaps you weren't talking about feelings and failure at that point, but even design, how on earth do you begin to persuade your colleagues that this is something to give a go? So I'd be fascinated to know a little bit more about perhaps the language, as well as any other forms of persuasion you use to get people to at least give it a go at the beginning.
Well, I'd suggest that I'm somehow a vanguard on this, and others are all closed doors. I mean, I think my colleagues are just as concerned as I am about making sure we continue to be relevant and make an impact in the communities that we serve. That means that people really are focused on what is the consequence of what we're doing, rather than let's just worry about the function. So I do think that in a sense, I'm grateful that I work in an organisation that's open to that sort of change. I do think it's part of my role to make it open, and I do think that the politics of the place is a place that wants to be open and wants to experiment. If you can't deal with failure, then you can't actually manage anything, in my view. You must learn from failure, and to have a sort of learning approach which is about always being relevant, always trying to make a positive impact in communities, improving people's life and their life chances. It seems to me we're privileged in the public sector to have the opportunity to do that. We shouldn't just be managing a service. Yeah.
But have you found that, as you say, just coming back to first principles of why people got into public service is no doubt a way to persuade them that this is an appropriate approach. But honestly, over the past 5 years, as you have deepened the capacity and capability of design methods within Lewisham Council, it can't have been that simple. There must have been difficulty.
Well, I think one of the difficulties is that actually the design community is not got sufficient capacity. So there isn't sufficient people intelligently clienting service design. There's not enough people with the capabilities of working for, there are 400 local authorities, there are hundreds of other public agencies. There's not enough people with these capabilities. There's lots of management consultancies doing business process re-engineering, business process improvement, any form of management's why I put all those management fags up in a sense. Yeah. You can find them from anyone. You can't actually find many people who can do service design for you.
Which is exactly why I assume, therefore, we're saying this is something for everyone. I mean, this is something for your leaders and managers and frontline staff to build their capacity, and this is not something necessarily to ship in designers to execute. Yes,
but people do, by default, think that it's just styling. This just means we've got to put a nice, have a nice reception. Yes, you have to have good receptions. I'm not saying ours is. I mean, but you have to have a good front office. You have to have a good styling. But styling, I think it was Camus, wasn't it? It's a style. I won't. Anyway, style basically can hide lots of bad practice. So you've got to have styling. But the important thing is you've got substance and you're open to change.
But life isn't even that simple, is it? In that you want to skill your core team to have design skills in their practice, because these days there's so much outsourcing. We've got the big outsourcing companies, Capita, Serco, whoever. Does that mean that there's a challenge if you're beginning to outsource things, that your team then distances themselves again from the end user? I mean, how do we think about this in the broader way in which local authorities actually deliver?
We have, like most public agencies, have a mixed economy of provision. So we will spend 200 million with supply partners in the private sector, including people like Capita and others, and they have some capabilities on service design. We have some capabilities. The important thing is that we mix and match our capabilities. We're not competing with private companies or not-for-profits. That actually the important thing I think for public service is that we enable people to work together, the public and the private and the not-for-profit sector, whether that's in social care or an environment, whether it's about recycling or whether it's doing things like improving adoption and fostering. I mean, we're talking about lots of agencies here that it isn't a monolithic municipal state. It's long since moved from that, in my view.
Well, maybe the final question for me, so prepare yourselves and we'll get the microphones out to you in a minute, is again, though, so if it is this very mixed economy with such complexity, I would assume you're really advocating for more people to learn from what you've explored here about bringing these skills on board. Do you feel that there is enough capacity within all of the agencies and entities that you collaborate with to do what you do?
I think there's capacity. What there isn't is abilities and capability. There's not enough. So the capacity is what's the bandwidth you have for people to do this. The issue is whether you've got people with the ability and then the capability, in other words, the ability in the future to do things. And in my view, there isn't enough people in the public sector sufficiently trained in service design, and there aren't enough service designers that are competing and presenting work. And I think that we need to build up that ability and capability, both which is why the Design Commission first looked at skills on this, abilities, and then I think we're looking from the public sector in terms of the supply, looking essentially at the supply chain. Yeah. So the capacity is there easily. What's not there is capability at the moment in sufficient number.
Yeah, thank you. Right, let's get some questions from the audience. A couple of microphones here. Just a reminder, please, to try and keep your questions as concise as possible and have a question in there, as well as just saying a little bit who you are before you start. So who's going to be the first cloner over there in the back? Thank you very much.
Hello, Catherine Shovlin, RSA Fellow and Director of a community charity in Lewisham. Google our Kickstarter project, looking up in New Cross. One of the things you were talking about was risk and experimentation, and community engagement, I think, is a rich source of that. I'm interested in how you can better design the interface so that the systems that are in local authorities can take good advantage of the creativity and innovation in community organisations.
Well, I personally think that one of the the key ways forward is for community organisations to be much more involved in helping people solve problems at the local level, but potentially also in themselves providing service. And it's something you may have a particular view about the extent to which we're successful or not in this, but the particular thing that we want to do is engage and involve our community organisations, but community enterprise not just in terms of locality, but community more broadly in terms of what people are doing for their service and their community in London isn't just where you live. It can be who you identify with. What's your sense of identity? What's your sense of connection? And the important thing is that we, in local government, connect with all forms of community, whether it's of place or of identity or of faith or whatever. And the important thing is that we enable interface of all these different... I mean, my mayor this morning had a major meeting with our faith communities because he sees a crucial dimension being the way that the civic life of the place connects with the faith of the place. Now, I think that local government is nothing more than a community of self-governance. It's not just a provision of service. So we should be both about self-governance and working with local bodies as much as we are how are we changing the nature of service.
Great, thank you. Should we take a couple now? So one over here and one over here. Thank you. Maybe here first, as the microphone is here first. And
hi, Barry. Chermayeff wrote Design in the Public Good about 50 years ago, and talked about things like participation and contribution. What's stopped that? And, you know, people were talking about this back when we were kids. What's been the big barrier?
Great, thank you. And second question over here.
Do Lewisham employ designers? Do you have designers on staff, or do you hire that capability in? And to what extent can civil servants, if you like, become designers through training?
Okay. Well, firstly, we have trained staff in design, specifically around service design, but if we need particular forms of service design, we'll hire them in. We'll either hire people in or contract with businesses that are specialists. But we have developed staff, and we think it's important. We're connecting with others, like with others in the public sector that are looking at service design and trying to train their own staff. We've done that. So we think it's important that we develop our in-house capability, but not such that we've got teams of service designers who really could be working in. That they need sufficient skill to know when they need experts from outside. In terms of what went wrong, I think that the public sector looked in on itself, became managerialist, overly managerialist, and believed that its purpose was really to manage functions and to manage them in, and I think it's still elements of this, so that I'm thinking today of the duties that are being applied to the health service are all about compliance. They're not about fostering good cultures. In a sense, not about fostering the public good. It's about fostering a sense of compliance. And I think that this managerialism was really about service and about cost and about budget and not enough about value. So we manage our budget, we manage our spend, but we don't know enough about our costs, so we don't know what the value is to the public. And so I think that we got locked in on all these other approaches to what's the best way of doing this. I mean, I was the efficiency champion for 6 years. I remember all that, the cashable and non-cashable savings. I remember once being the Y2K champion. Y2K was the millennium bug, for those of you who are too young. That was when it was believed that planes would fall out of the sky. We were so deluded that we manufactured a risk that didn't exist and spent billions on it And we know this is the case because the Australians didn't do it because they spent their money building, because they were planning for the Olympic Games in Sydney, so they didn't worry about Millennium thing, and nothing happened over there. So we know that all of our money was OTOs and nugatory. But my point is that, my own experience is spending a lot of time on activities that weren't really valuable to the public.
On that point, maybe of digital technology and contribution, I mean, many people argue that digital technology is an amazing new way to connect and to encourage and to perhaps measure contribution and all the rest of it. Where do you stand on how important digital technologies are in public service reform?
Oh, I think they're very, very important. I think that the government's digital by default is very, very good. I think they're very important. I think you can use social media technologies much more now. You can involve and engage people. I'm not a cyber utopian, though. I don't believe that this means it's all going to be fantastic. Bad things can be done with digital technologies, just as good things can be done. The important thing is we accentuate the good. Nearly got that wrong. But the important thing is we accentuate the good. Yeah. I do think that it offers opportunities for many more people to be involved. Sometimes the problem is that you get hyper involvement of a smaller number of people that are even more involved because they're digitally involved. They go to the meetings and they do even more. It doesn't actually expand out to a greater number of people. So you need to be realistic, I think. I'm not a dystopian like Morozov. I don't believe that the whole thing's possibly just a mechanism for control. But neither am I a utopian, believing, this is all brilliant and marvellous. I do think it gives major opportunities and we should use them positively.
Great, thank you. Right, some more questions. Lord Bichard, and then over here, just there. So. Oh, I think
hello, my name is Brenda Setchell. I was very struck by your emphasis on how services make people feel and building kindness into services. In my experience, the health service has actually, in particular units, been very successful at that. I was just interested whether you could give us an example of something that may have happened in Lewisham, which has really fulfilled that making people feel about their services and building that kindness in.
Great, lovely. And should we just take the second question?
How has your insight, how have you managed to inspire property developers on residential projects in the Lewisham area? And has the end result been sustainable and functional as opposed to just undesirable boxes?
If you've got a question, I'd rather have a much easier question.
Should we
much easier
get
question?
One from Michael as well,
let me take your. No, I'll take your question. I'm sorry. These are very difficult questions. First of all, the thing about boxes. You're absolutely right. I think that there is a tendency at the moment to design around value. There's value in land. And so how many things can we get on it, rather than what's the sustainable use of properties. I think we've got, our planning and our regeneration areas are looking all the time about the long-term experience of living in these properties and living in this area rather than just putting up boxes. And I think that whole sense about building cities that work for the people who live in them rather than just responding to the economic needs of the moment, I think is absolutely crucial. And I would like to think that both in master planning and in particularly site-based planning, that we have tried to incorporate that. We had an approach about creativity and planning some years ago, and I think we have got some very good examples of how master planning is about creating sustainable places that are good to live in, not just valuable to develop. Now, your question, Adam, was on
feelings.
Feelings. I would say, quite honestly, that the only areas where we've been able to make communities feel is where we've done things that have involved the community and has been less around a service. So when we actually worked with the families of the children who died in the New Cross fire in the early 1980s, that was a bigger symbol of what we were about as an organisation and as a council and as a place civically than most of the service delivery that we did. And I think what we were doing recently in relation to work jointly with our hospital and our health partners around challenging some changes in health, not that we're against changes in health, was about what we're saying about the community that we're serving. So most of the things we've done about feeling we haven't done through service design. And my challenge was saying, I think we need to be thinking about this from service design. We need to build it into the service design so that the people who are literally providing the service can feel like that, can feel that they're doing something. It's probably only done really, I think, in relation to frontline staff who are sweeping the streets, who are collecting refuse, who are visible and obvious. They have a sense of what they're doing. We need to do that much more across many of our other services.
Right. Michael.
Michael Bishop, you haven't talked anything about power, which I was slightly surprised about. Because I agree with you that probably the most compelling failure of public services over the last 30 years has been our failure to design around clients, consumers, to co-design, to co-produce. You talked about those. But like Greg Parston, I increasingly ask myself, well, why haven't we been successful? Because it kind of feels like a no-brainer. And yet I'm not even as optimistic as you. In some respects, I think we've gone back, partly because we've fragmented governance so badly. And the conclusion I'm kind of depressingly coming to, that some of the answer is because professionals and public servants and civil servants are refusing to hand over power. And they're holding on to power, not even sharing it, let alone passing it to clients and users and giving them the power to co-produce. Am I just getting old and too depressing?
Far be it from me to say that. Imagine you're an educational psychologist and you've trained all your life to be an educational psychologist. And you apply to have your loft extended. And you apply for a loft extension. And you're a professional, you've got probably 2 degrees. You've been working for many years, you apply, you've decided to have your loft extension, and the planners say, no, you can't have it. How long do you think it takes you to actually work out whether the planners are operating within the right rules of discretion or not? I think probably you probably have to look things up, go to the, you're going to put a lot of money into this. You're going to extend your home, probably spend £20,000 or something. So you're going to examine what this planner's doing. And this planner's also got 2 degrees. It's not in what you've got, but it's in something else. And so your ability to question that planner is immense. Now imagine you're a planner and you've got a child on the autistic spectrum disorder, and the educational psychologist has assessed your child. How long does it take you to question whether the psychologist is right or wrong? Probably like that, because you've got personal experience. And I think that professionals are, in the current climate, subject to a sort of crisis of confidence, in that they grew up in the 1950s, not the same people, but people from the 1950s and 60s, 70s and 80s grew up with their specialism, their specialty. And actually that specialty is now really paper thin. They may have had 2 degrees to do it, they may have got a lot of experience in it, but actually it can be challenged at any moment. And so yes, they are powerful, but the power is so easy to take away. And I think one of the big problems that we've got is all professionals, really their professionalism and their expertise is quite thin relative to other professionals. You know this when you have a condition, you go to a hospital and you're treated. How long does it take you to work out whether or not they're treating you properly? And I think it's to do with the level of education of our society, the level of demand, the level of expectation. It's not just about the power of the professionals, it's about the power of the consumers and the citizens. And I think if we up the power of citizens, then actually we're making a much more open society, which is going to be much more, and I think the problem is that professionals can't change quick enough. They're not able to change as quickly as the world is changing the demands for them. So I'm a bit more optimistic, but I can see the problem.
And do you have any thoughts about solutions which haven't been discussed or haven't been pushed forward as much as they might?
No, I just think people need to realise that. I think when in local government you manage services that are so diverse, you'll know this, Michael, so diverse and so different, that there's a tendency to worry that you need to understand every single one of them. I need to understand this and need to understand. You spend your whole time understanding everything. Knowledge isn't breadth. Knowledge is actually depth. And you can apply things like trial and error, user experience, risk and uncertainty, the fact that things are combined. You can apply that to any areas. I think the important thing is that we don't just rigidly have silos of professionals delivering functional services to people. We help the public solve their own problems by having this multidisciplinary approach and by opening up professionals rather than by worrying too much about the rigidities that they have.
Right. I think we have time possibly for 2 more questions, so let's make them count. One over here and one over here. Thank you. Again, say who you are, please, if possible.
Yes. My name is George Kies. I'm a fellow. From a society point of view, doing things from a continuous improvement point of view, Kaizen or minimum viable product, requires patience and requires an attitude, not just to accept failure, but to accept continuous change for an infinite period of time. We are used as a society to accept change if we know when it's going to finish the change. And it looks like a contradiction that you're advocating a system of continuous improvement, which means forever, and the society's and the press expectations, which may need to be retrained or re-educated or reset to embrace change at a lower speed but more convergent towards a better solution. Yeah. So what can be done in this area?
What could be done? Well, I say that every success looks like a failure in the middle, so that when you're failing, you just say, well, we're in the middle. We're in the middle. It's going to get better. Don't worry. Keep the faith. Keep improving. And it's. I mean.